If you're not afraid of China, you might be soon, because there's a lot of people that are working very hard to terrify you about China, whether it's military threat or economically it's a big contender. There's this sort of Cold War brewing, and why not? For certain, for certain elites, it's a great way to bulk up the defense budget if you're going to be scared about possible war with China. Any sort of economic policy could be justified when it comes to trade with China. But there are thankfully at least some politicians that are pushing back against this narrative. And we want to give credit to Bernie Sanders, who wrote an entire op-ed trying to get people to chill just a little bit when it comes to China. It's available at Foreign Affairs, but here's some of what he had to say. It is distressing and dangerous that a fast-growing consensus is emerging in Washington that views the US-Chinese relationship as a zero-sum economic and military struggle. The prevalence of this view will create a political environment in which the cooperation that the world desperately needs will be increasingly difficult to achieve. And he specifically talks about the need to solve all sorts of different problems, including concerns about human rights, economic issues, climate change. These are all things that we can't simply pretend that China doesn't exist for or make them into our chief rival over. He calls out one of his colleagues by name, saying a few months ago, my conservative colleague, Senator Tom Cotton, compared the threat from China to the one posed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Quoting Tom Cotton is saying, once again, America confronts a powerful totalitarian adversary that seeks to dominate Eurasia and remake the world order. And Bernie says, and just as Washington reorganized the US national security architecture after World War II to prepare for conflict with Moscow, Cotton wrote, today, America's long-term economic, industrial, and technological efforts need to be updated to reflect the growing threat posed by communist China. And he puts this, what we're seeing now, develop when it comes to politicians, as he points out, like Tom Cotton, and occasionally politicians like Joe Biden, who have some things to say about China recently. He puts it in historical context, recent historical context, saying the rush to confront China has a very recent precedent, the global war on terror. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, the American political establishment quickly concluded that anti-terrorism had to become the overriding focus of US foreign policy. Almost 2 decades and $6 trillion later, it's become clear that national unity was exploited to launch a series of endless wars that proved enormously costly in human, economic, and strategic terms, and that gave rise to xenophobia and bigotry in US politics, the brunt of it borne by American Muslim and Arab communities. It is no surprise that today, in a climate of relentless fear-mongering about China, the country is experiencing an increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. And as I mentioned this morning, on the damage report, that violence continues. Culver City, actually, just yesterday, had an incident of that sort. So we have a little bit more that we can talk about some other politicians, but Bernie Sanders is hoping to change the conversation about the future of diplomatic ties between the US and China.
Yeah, so first of all, great to see that America is moving their ire from one side of my family to the other. Okay, so I'm Muslim, so we took the brunt of it after 9/11. My wife is Chinese, and so obviously our kids are half and half. So now they're moving on to anti-Chinese hate. And again, this is not just Trump now. This is basically the Washington establishment, and that's who Bernie Sanders is calling out, and that definitely includes Democrats. So now he says, and if you follow Bernie Sanders, you might be a little confused. So I want to be clear, and this is really important. And actually, I think maybe even the most important part of this story. Bernie Sanders has not been in favor of just unmitigated free trade with China throughout. And then so simpletons might look at that and go, wait, I thought you were against dealing with China. Now you're saying you're in favor of dealing with China, right? I don't get it. Well, that's because the world's not black and white. The question isn't whether to engage with China. The question is how to engage with China. And the answer isn't we should love them and write them love letters, as Trump did with North Korea, or we should nuke them. No, the world is not black and white. The answer is almost always somewhere in the middle. It doesn't mean that the moderate position or the centrist position is right. It just means the extremes are unlikely to be right. And did Bernie carry that nuance forward to today? Yes, he said that the Chinese government is surely guilty of many policies and practices that I oppose and that all Americans should oppose. The theft of technology, the suppression of workers' rights in the press, the repression taking place in Tibet and Hong Kong, Beijing's threatening behavior toward Taiwan, and the Chinese government's atrocious policies towards the Uyghur people. So again, simpletons on the right or people that think they're on the left or something will go, oh no, I don't get it. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. Oh, come on. On the one hand, he says China's bad on some things, and on the other hand, he says we shouldn't nuke them. I don't get it. It's just really not that hard. So yes, we should have a smart strategic policy towards China. We don't need to have them as an adversary. On the other hand, you can't be just let everything slide and go, oh, you're gonna steal our IP. Okay, yeah, no big deal, right? Oh, you're setting up concentration camps for the Uygur people. Oh, no problem. No, the answer is, here's how we're going to oppose that, and here's how we're gonna work with you on climate change. Because we don't have a choice. They're among the top 2 powers in the world. We're one, they're the other. We have got to find a way to work with each other while pushing them in the right direction. So as usual, Bernie Sanders, a rare voice of reason in DC.
Yeah. Well, Cenk, I think you're wrong when you say that we don't need to make those guys our enemy. How else are we gonna justify damn near $1 trillion in our budget every single year for the military, right? Like if we don't have a scary enemy, you can't justify that in a country where inequality, excuse me, is at record highs, right? Like you can't justify the amount of resources we commit to planes that don't even freaking work for enemies who we don't even freaking have, right? Like that's the entire point of it. And I thought about it, when I was reading Bernie's op-ed, I was like, man, we don't even talk about ISIS anymore. Remember when ISIS was gonna come, some guy in a turban in a black pickup was gonna come and strangle your babies in their carriages while you slept? Like, remember that? It's completely over. We don't even talk about it anymore. I think even 2016, it wasn't even a focal point of either one of the candidates' platforms, right? Like we're over as Americans, we're over the war on terror. So we need a new big bad, and I guess that big bad is China.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because I want to talk a little bit more about the future of where this conversation is going to go. So we had the status quo. Bernie is trying to put out there that hey, maybe we don't need a stupid, pointless, expensive Cold War, and he's not the only one, of course. Other politicians, including Representative Ilhan Omar, have spoken out. Ilhan said recently, we need to distinguish between justified criticisms of the Chinese government's human rights record and a Cold War mentality that uses China as a scapegoat for our own domestic problems and demonizes Chinese Americans. And the thing is, like,
nuance.
Oh God, it's like you accept reality and don't go to war with them. Anyway, but what are we supposed to do? Like, when I think about the last 20 years, we invaded a couple countries and then just stayed there, forever. Now they're gonna use China as a way to continually spend ever more on, as Wosny pointed out, planes that don't work. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of billions of dollars you throw in them, you apparently can't make them stay aloft. And there won't ever be any justification for it. It'll just be, woo, like nothing's happening. I don't think this is gonna be like the last Cold War and there's gonna be proxy wars between us. I don't think economically that's viable, but they are still gonna try to sustain this sort of thing. And at least, as we were talking about with TDR, when it was the Middle East, like there's conflict going on, we're losing soldiers. People can see that and they can potentially get sick of it. And there could be a reaction to it. But this is mostly gonna be military budget and an occasional speech that gets people pissed off at China or whatever. It seems so much easier to sustain without any rationale, just as an excuse to change some trade policies and to pump up the military budget.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we get people fired up against this Cold War when nobody really supports it anyway?
Yeah, nobody supports it. The right wing doesn't support it, the left wing doesn't support it. There's only one set of people who support it, and you guys are gonna be shocked. It's politicians who get tons of financing from the defense industry. Whoa, that is, I did not see that coming.
But and the thing is, the thing about China, why this is a foolhardy enemy to pick, our economies are like this. They're intertwined. You can't separate what we do from what China does because, basically 35, 40 years ago, American business decided we wanted all their cheap labor. And now that they've built up a pretty sizable like middle and wealthy class, we want their consumers. We want to sell stuff to them, right? Like they're too important to us to ever actually spite or smite them. So this is just a weird sort of enemy to try to just take up on a whim. It doesn't make sense. We are China at this point.
Yeah, but actually you bring up a really important point because part of the reason why we weren't as much Cold War mongering against China for the last 20, 30 years was because we loved that they were opening up their markets. So McDonald's, et cetera, were rushing in and they were thrilled that China is opening up and basically becoming capitalist. But now that China has built up their own businesses, they are starting to block Western interests and particularly American business interests within China and blocking access to that market of over 1.2 billion consumers. That's a market 4 times larger than America. So now part of what's driving is not just the defense contractors, but other corporations pressuring corporate Republicans and Democrats. Hey, now make them open up, okay? Otherwise, threaten them and stuff, right? Because we need that market, And guys, again, a nuance on all fronts, right? So, is China an actual threat to Hong Kong and Taiwan? Yes. So my wife's originally from Taiwan. I know a lot of folks from there, and they all have to serve in the military, and they train. And I forget the exact number of hours or days now. My recollection is their entire military is training around 8 hours, because that's how much they've calculated America will take to get there and rescue them. Okay, because Taiwan cannot do a war with China. So I forget if it's 8 hours or 2 days or whatever it is, but whatever the number is, that's their entire training is just hold until America comes, okay? And so it's important that we protect our allies. So it's not like, oh, we're not doing Cold War, so who cares about Taiwan? Take it anytime you want, right? No, you've got it, and then by the way, should we want the markets opened up so that American companies, there's no such thing as American companies, they're all multinational, but some of the companies that started here and are based in Delaware, that they open up as well and are able to compete there? Yes, because some of those folks work here, and that would create more jobs to be able to sell goods into China. So we want all those things, but we don't need to do it by building a thermonuclear submarine that doesn't work, but funnels like $500 billion to Raytheon.
Yeah.
Right. That's the underlying issue that not only do the politicians never talk about, but the media almost never talks about. I mean, there's a multi-trillion-dollar elephant in the room. That's the defense contractors, and that's driving most of this Cold War mongering that Bernie Sanders is fighting against.
Yeah, and my final thought is, I feel to some extent, I think the media's, the fact that they wouldn't have that conversation is partly complete and utter ignorance on virtually every other country other than the United States, including the United States actually. But then partially, I think at a much lower level, a little bit of fear of seeming not patriotic enough. That if you were not, it feels a little bit like that thing over the past 2 decades of, no, you have to rally with your country. This is our national enemy. How dare you talk about them as someone that we should work with, that we should try to get along with, that we should try to then influence to get better on human rights. I feel like there's a little bit of that too. And the way that things are going, the way that politicians in both parties, the way their narrative is when it comes to China, I worry that pressure on media is going to get stronger. So all the more important that there are both media as well as politicians that are willing to speak out for a different path. That said, oh no, sorry, Wosny, what were you gonna say?
No, what I was gonna say is I think some of the propaganda has seeped into American thought amongst the citizenry. I saw it myself in my own job where, Daryl Morey, general manager then of the Houston Rockets, he put out a free Hong Kong tweet, and it caused basically a brouhaha, international incident, because the NBA does a lot of business in China, and the Chinese government don't play.
Yeah.
If you want to make money over here, you don't get to talk crap about our government. And a lot of people over here felt like, yo, those dudes don't get to tell us how to talk. We have freedom of speech, democracy, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a lot of negative feelings towards China within the population. Not that people want to see us go to war or something like that, but people definitely see China in an extremely unfavorable light these days.
Yeah, well, we certainly saw over the last year a lot of attempt to tie that in with the pandemic, of course, too.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.